Just remember, when you're talking about Blitz, the O is silent. Helluva Boss has released an updated version of its own pilot. It has gone up on Amazon Prime, and it is called Mission Zero. So, I haven't talked about Helluva Boss, really. I've talked about Has Been Hotel, but people have asked me intermittently, are you ever going to talk about Helluva Boss? Like, the main thing was that I wasn't getting to episodes right as they were airing, and they are spread so far apart, I couldn't like gather my thoughts to like give a full review of the first or the second seasons, and then it was shorts coming out. I'm like, what even do I have to say about this? So I do watch Helluva Boss, and for the most part I like it. And this one's interesting to talk about, not because there's a ton that happens in it, but just because of the nature of what it is. If you're not familiar with this show or the specifics of its history, the Helluva Boss pilot came out a while back. The full first two seasons of the show were released exclusively to YouTube. They now have a deal, Spindlehorse, the animation company, and Vivian Madrano, aka Vivzipop, who is the creator, now has a deal with Amazon Prime. Now, she's also the creator of Has Been Hotel. The Has Been Hotel pilot actually came out first, and then it got picked up by Amazon, and it's been getting worked on over there for a while. So, like, I don't think it was the full first two seasons, like a season and a half of Helluva Boss, which was a spin-off set in the same version of Hell, but with completely different characters, happened before Has Been actually had its first proper episode. But anyways, the Helluva Boss pilot has been an outlier for a little while and has kind of already been declared non-canon. So as kind of a kickoff to Amazon carrying the first two Helluva Boss seasons, and will also be where the season 3 episodes air first, and they will show up on YouTube later, which I think that's a good deal. I appreciate the amount of control that Vivzy has maintained over the property, and it doesn't seem like she gave up all that much for this deal, which good on you. I mean, like, honestly, regardless of what you think of her work or whether or not you like her shows or whatever, this is a good deal for an indie animation studio to get. And it's the kind of deal that I hope others are able to also broker in future for other projects that are kind of along these lines. I think this is overall just a good development for indie animation, regardless of what you think of this actual show. But anyways, setting all that aside, it kind of serves as like the kickoff for all this stuff's now on Amazon Prime, and sort of gear people up for like, hey, it's coming, and it gives people a reason to start watching it here, even if they had already been watching it over on YouTube. Now, as I said, the original pilot is a little bit wonky. First of all, it's shorter than a standard episode, as is this. And what's interesting is the reason that the original version of the pilot was being considered non-canon isn't for any real logistical plot reasons. It's not like it took like this major turn or like set something up that they just never did or decided they didn't want to do. It was nothing like that. It had a bit more to do with the characters, a couple in specific, which is actually not uncommon for pilots. A lot of the times pilots are, it's the test place, and when you get feedback from that test, you'll make adjustments often to characters in specific. You'll adjust the performances. Sometimes you'll recast, depending on the nature of things. But there were two main characters who were noticeably different in the pilot than they were in the series proper. The first of those is Moxie. And the main thing there was I did actually rewatch the original version of the pilot before watching this, just to refresh my memory. Moxie's a little oddly aggro in that original version of the pilot. I'm not going to say Moxie never gets upset. He actually does. He's a very tightly wound character. But he gets set off by way more minor things, and he's kind of snippy with Millie, who's his wife, which is not typical of Moxie in the show proper. So he's a little off. Only a little bit, though. The one who's really off, if you go back and rewatch the pilot, is the character of Stolas. Now, Stolas is the sort of demonic prince. He is the love interest for our lead character of Blitz, who is an imp who has started this assassination business for newly arrived people in hell if they feel like they want to blame somebody who is still alive, either for their death or just their life sucking. These Blitz and Moxie and Millie will jump on up to Earth and just take out whoever it was that their client decided they wanted gone. And the way that they're able to do that is they have hold of the Grimoire, which is a magical book that lets them transport themselves to the earthly plane. And the way that Blitz has that is he is sleeping with Stolas, who is the rightful owner of the thing. Now, when I say Stolas was quite a bit different in the pilot, it's because in the pilot, well, first of all, different voice actor. They had, I don't know the circumstances specifically. I don't know if like the original voice actor couldn't do it, didn't want to keep doing it, if they had actually always intended for the person who ended up doing it in the show and that person just wasn't available when they did the pilot. I don't know. But for whatever reason, it's a completely different voice, but that's not so much the issue. The issue with the original version of the pilot is Stolas is a lot more, well, it kind of feels like he's being set up to be an actual villain. There's a lot more outright manipulation and sort of just a threatening nature in his voice. Like he's still doing this thing where like he's sleeping with Blitz and wants that, but the way he talks to Blitz reeks much more of someone who knows they are using their place of power to get what they want. Whereas the Stolas we got is just a bit more of a goofy guy. It's actually kind of really funny in Mission Zero, in the revised version of the pilot. When we first hear Stolas get on the phone to Blitz, he starts out talking kind of like he sounded in the pilot, sounding way more, just this sort of dark turn to his voice, until he like just kind of cracks. He's like, "Oh, I want to see you again," and he gets all ridiculous the way that he does, and sort of bridging that gap. And it's I think it's actually especially important to kind of get this revision for Stolas because, first of all, Helluva Boss is both Helluva Boss and Has-Been Hotel and Visipop in general, as well as other people who work there, have a rather significant hatedoms that follow them around. But I'm not dealing with that. Even within the fandom communities for Helluva Boss, there's a lot of debate over the character of Stolas, usually revolving around the notion of how much is he abusing his position of power with the arrangement that he has with Blitz. And I do have to wonder how much of the arguments saying that Stolas is abused, and understand, I'm not saying Stolas is perfect. He's not. He's messed up, and he did like at least one or two things that I personally was like, oh, dude, come on. But, and I don't mean like bad plot turns. I mean like character decisions that are consistent, but I was just like, oh, don't be like that. But for the most part, it's always felt odd to me, the argument that like, oh, he's manipulating Blitz. And it feels like in a lot of ways that is an argument based off of the pilot version of Stolas as opposed to the show proper. Because the pilot version, definitely is aware of the power dynamic and how it is tilted in his favor. Whereas Stolas, as we've gotten him in the show, I'm not going to say there isn't a power imbalance. There is. But it's one of those things where, like, I don't think he understands or appreciates that. And it's not necessarily because of, like, a willful ignorance, but more of he just wants to see Blitz. And this is the way he's figured out to do it. And he hasn't really stopped and thought about, is this an abuse of my position of power? That's just not where his head's at. And again, it doesn't make everything on the up and up, but like intent, I think, matters a fair bit when you're assessing at the very least a character's personality, if not their moral compass. So bringing Stolas way more in line with the version of him that actually exists in the show, I suspect was actually probably the main driving reason for this to be done, outside of sort of promotional purposes of being like, hey, it's on Prime now, plus here's a revised pilot. I think creatively, that was probably the main narrative force driving that decision. And it is also a case of where, like, okay, so like Has Been Hotel's pilot is also a little weird and wonky, partially because of like the visuals sort of shifted a little bit, not the overall design, but the nature of the animation. And also they recast from the pilot to the series proper with that. But the thing is that's funny is that the Has Been Hotel pilot not being on Prime, I would actually argue was a little bit of a problem for that series because the pilot covers the premise and episode 1 of the show just kind of jumps into it and you have to figure it out as it goes. And that's not really true of the Helluva Boss pilot. The Helluva Boss pilot, well, at least the revised version, does sort of cover it a little bit more clearly. Like they are just starting out this business. Here's how they've set it up. This is their first job. Where like, I'm not going to say that wasn't the case in the original pilot, but there wasn't as much emphasis on the clarity of that. But you don't need to know any of this to understand episode 1. Like you can jump in at episode 1 and it makes about the same amount of sense. The logistics aren't really that important. And as a result, it's not a 1-for-1 retelling of the specifics of that first version of the pilot. They keep a couple of specific beats. They still let Brendan Rogers, who voices Blitz, say his favorite line, which was from the pilot. It's a line I cannot repeat on YouTube, but it is what he says to Stolas' wife as he's leaving their house. And it's a good line, well delivered, and it kind of needed to be brought back and exist again because it's kind of too iconic if you are a fan of this show. So yeah, as a little treat to sort of update and give us a version of the pilot that's actually consistent with how these characters are as they appear in the show itself, and have a little treat for people who are watching it on Prime for the first time. Yeah, I think it's a neat little project. Going back and redoing pilots, especially this late, is not something I've ever really heard of happening before, and it's kind of interesting. And also, like, thankfully, the original version of the pilot isn't going anywhere. That's still up on YouTube. So, like, you want to do a comparison, which I think is creatively an interesting exercise, you can do that too. But anyways, Helluva Boss Mission 0. What'd you think about it? Do you like it better than the original pilot? I think I do. Some of the humor of the original pilot didn't land for me quite the same way. The stuff with the kid, it wasn't unfunny, but it dragged out a little bit long. This one feels tighter, snappier in terms of the pacing of the jokes. So I do think I prefer this one overall. The original version of the pilot's still fun, though. But do you have a preference? What are your thoughts on any of this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. Also help. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here. So just come on back next time you need a break. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lufula, Monty Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Movie Turtle, Oliver B, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Alyssa Pedersen, Mary Mello, Becky Sparks, Loki Eris, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Barabajoggle, and Sir Didymus is my favorite, as well as Welsh Wrestling Geeks. So, folks said they wanted the rats back. Here they are. I really should have not worn something that exposed this much skin. Their nails are sharp. Ow. Oh, you guys, get back here. Butthead.